Everyone has a podcast. Do you?
No.
So there used to be a saying back in the day that your book was your business card. Does anybody remember that? Where it's like, you have to have a book to be seen credible. I contend now that the same can be said about a podcast. That your podcast is your business card because everyone has one. So what exactly is a podcast? And then for these purposes, we're talking about audio podcasting. It is an episodic series of digital audio files that a listener can download and listen to. And I'm going to add to that definition, they can listen to at any time and they can listen to repeatedly. There's a statistic that says that average person listens to about 6 different podcasts every week. So 6 podcasts a person is listening to every single week. Podcast is the combination of 2 words, iPod and broadcast, which I didn't know until I was preparing for this for this seminar. So you think about Apple. Remember when we used to have the Apple iPods? And I do remember when podcasting first came out in like 2000 and then it kind of died down, but it is here to stay. It's pre-recorded audio for the most part, even though sometimes you may go to a live podcast recording event. But for most business purposes, which I think the audience here is, it would be pre-recorded audio, and it's 100% digital media. And so if you look at the graphics, Stitcher is one of the several podcast platforms that is in existence today.
So you could go there and find the podcast,
Yep.
Is that right?
So you can go there and find my podcasts, actually, on
Okay.
Stitcher. So there are 700,000 different podcasts today. There are 29 million podcast episodes. So my podcast, the Carpe Diem with Jasmine podcast, we've kind of been on a hiatus, but I think I'm up to 43 episodes. There are 2,000 to 3,000 different podcasts being launched every single month. There was a great article in the Star Tribune, which I have with me yesterday, talking about how so many people are launching podcasts, and there was like this group that started a podcast, and basically they were recording it on their phone at a room in the Hennepin County Library downtown and just uploading it. So it's a very easy way to, or easy platform to join. It might not be the best quality if you're just doing it on your phone at a room in the library, not in a studio, which we're fortunate to have access to at Office Centers, but people are doing it very turnkey. And there's news programs, there's narrative journalism, I think the crime genre is very popular, comedy, and then bantercast, which again, I'm making the generalization that most of us would probably be doing bantercast. My podcast, Carpe Diem with Jasmine, I say we share lessons on the journey of living an empowered and authentic life. So really, I'm having conversations with people and I'm sharing their stories. I don't have a true product except myself to market, or my book and my seminar. So I think the more people get a taste of me and what I talk to and people that I find interesting, that helps me in my marketing. So that's how I use my podcast, really to market myself, and then also to support my mission of inspiring and empowering people to live more connected, authentic, and mindful lives. So why podcast? I got the podcast really because it was an alternative to blogging. I had a blog and I love my blog, but it irked me when people would be like, oh my God, Jasmine, you have this typo. I would be very appreciative when they would send me a reminder that I had this typo. And not that I'm a perfectionist, but it just made me feel bad. Like, oh my God, my work is not the best quality. And I know that I am not the minor details. Like, I'm very much a visionary. And then there are the little details. Like, I get into the little details very well. But the middle details, I need other people to do. And I'm like, oh my God, I edited that post. I sent it to somebody to read it. I use Grammarly, and you mean to tell me there's a mistake? So it crushed me.
And then it's not seeing the big picture then, right?
Right, yeah. And so I was in the weeds. Like, this whole, like, it'd be this great blog post, and somebody told me about a minor typo, and it would just take me down. So I was like, oh my God, I love to talk. I can talk a lot better than I can write. And I think, I always say I'm one of those people, I come off better in person probably than I do in writing. So I was like, oh, podcasting, this can be my thing. Videos are great, but another thing about videos is that you need to look good. I don't wake up and curl my hair and put on makeup every day of the week. I probably do that about 5% of the time. So podcasting is like, yes, I can go into this podcast studio in my jeans and a t-shirt with my hair in a ponytail and talk with somebody else and not have to worry about, oh my God, do I look fat? Does this color look good? Do I have enough makeup? Is my lighting right? It was easy. Another thing about podcasting is that it crosses industry and sectors. So regular people are launching podcasts or doing like hobby podcasts. Companies are doing podcasts where they're sharing information to their consumers. Even like the news channels, they're reformatting some of their content as podcasts. I'm a big Oprah person. I love Super Soul Sunday. She turned Super Soul Sunday into a podcast with Super Soul Conversation. So we all know the adage that content is king. So podcasting is another way that you can repurpose some of your content and create new content that can be sliced and diced. I see Brianna back there doing social media, but you can, take sound bites from your podcast and put it on Instagram or tweet it out. So it's another way to cross industry and sector. And you connect with your potential clients and customers, and you connect with them while they're on the go. You connect with them in their everyday life, because most people are listening to podcasts either while they're working out or while they're commuting. Again, very easy to create. And you reach new audiences that you can't reach from traditional marketing platforms. Like someone might not have access to your website, even though there's SEO, or someone might not be coming to the seminar you're giving. Someone might not be a part of the Great Office Centers community, and they don't know about you and your services. But through Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, iPods, Reddit. There's so many different ways that you can promote and advertise your podcast so you can really reach new audiences. And the wonderful thing is that being an Office Centers member or even a friend, you have access to the great new podcast studios at Park and Woodbury. And when I started podcasting, I bought a microphone, I bought 2 microphones, I used my Mac, I was using GarageBand, I had the filter, or the pop mic to put over, and I would invite people to come to my house, which, when you want to like expand out of your circle and interview other people, that's like, oh no, I want to come to this person's house, or do I really want these people coming to my house? And then I had to like soundproof my house, so I had to put up like old comforters. I was like making, I guess I could have bought like some, things, but doing it on a budget. I would put up old comforters to kind of soundproof the room we were in, and we would sit really close together. But the nice thing about Office Centers is that there's a studio, and I don't have to do that anymore. Thank you. And an alternative.
Right, the low price of $15 an hour.
If you're a member.
If you're a member, it's $15 an hour, and you can go for
right.
30 minutes if you want.
Yeah. And I'm going to get into that. And then an alternative to podcasting, if you're like, oh my God, Jasmine, I'm totally intimidated because you are wonderful and I don't think I could ever do what you do. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. But you can always sponsor podcasts if you're a small business. And I think that's a great way for you to get the word out about your business. It's like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm ready to produce my own podcast, but I've got a budget of $500. Let me reach out to someone that's doing a podcast and see if they'll give me a commercial, and either you can voice over the commercial yourself, or you can have the host voice over the commercial. And that's a great way to kind of dip your foot into the podcasting world before you're like, I don't know if I want to launch my own podcast. So this is me, and this is my graphic for the Carpe Diem with Jasmine podcast. And a successful podcast is a real conversation that will benefit the audience. So whatever I do, I always ask myself, what is the intention? Why am I doing this? And so like I said, my podcast is really to support my brand and to inspire or support my mission and help me connect with people. And that's why I'm having real conversations. And when people tell me, okay, I want to come on the podcast, I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? to talk about. I had a friend and he does wonderful work doing these random acts of kindness, but I'm like, that's wonderful, that's your mission. How are we gonna make this interesting to someone else? So you have to think about your listener and think, what's in it for me? You know, not for me as the host, but what's in it for your listener. So I'm always asking that, what's in it for the listener? Why would they wanna listen to this podcast? How do you podcast? Like I said, it was very easy, but you do need to have some strategy of, you know, who you want to reach, an mission statement of why you're doing this, how often you're going to do this. I recommend a content or editorial calendar. You know, most podcasts are episodes, so some podcasts come out every single week, while some people maybe do batch recording and they do 10 to 20 episodes and then they go like on a 3-week hiatus and they say they're doing a hiatus and then they come back with another 10 or 20 or 30 episodes. Or sometimes people do longer podcasts. They do, you know, a 30-minute, 45-minute podcast every other week, and then on that off week they're doing like a 5-minute gym. I've even thought about that, like, oh, do I do a little, you know, jazzed up with Jasmine in between the Carpe Diem with Jasmine? So there's no one way to do it, but I would say that it's very important to be consistent and to communicate what your schedule is. Podcasts, again, they're episodic, so you have to do more than one episode. If you just do one podcast, you know, that's just, you know, you're just sharing some content. And even if you only do one season, that's one season of a podcast. So when you are developing your strategy, I say try to do a 3 to 5 season strategy or plan for your strategy when you're launching your podcast. So 2 things that are nice to have: a producer and an editor. And when I say a producer, that could be a friend and that can be your editor, but you don't have to have it. But you can piggyback off of someone you know and say, I'm interviewing this person. Can you help me brainstorm on some other questions? Because what I've learned from my personal experience is that we get very tunnel vision on what we're doing, what we're trying to communicate. And so sometimes we miss the obvious, or sometimes we miss the interesting. So by having someone else that you can bounce things off and maybe serve as that producer, and I'm not saying hire a real producer, but just someone in your network, that gives you an extra resource. And then the nice thing is, like, in your closing credits, you can say, oh, I want to give a shout out to my producer, blah, blah, blah. My producer is Catherine Keller, and I would say my fabulous producer, Catherine Keller. And literally, she has not done one thing with an episode, but listen to it before I post it to say, yep, this is good. Maybe, did you think about this? Do you want to add this in it? But she's not writing the question. She's not booking the guest. I'm doing it all. But she's giving me just a little bit of feedback before I go live. And so I give her that acknowledgement. And then an editor. I don't know how to edit, so I use an editing service, and Catherine does help me edit. But there's Uplants and there's Fiverr, so they're great resources if you want to edit. Will, are you an editor? Are you gonna be? Will, is that a service that you're gonna add?
I don't do any video audio editing. So,
okay.
No.
But you do video editing.
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not super good with the levels
okay.
and stuff.
So, or you can actually edit yourself.
We've got some people who have some editors too,
Right.
that they send them out, and he said they're pretty inexpensive. We've got a couple people like Podcast at Woodbury and a couple of other
Yeah.
places that.
I mean, and that's exactly what I do. I record before Office Centers. I was recording in GarageBand, and I just upload it to Dropbox. A person gets the link. They blah 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 blah. They actually do a little bit more for me, and then they upload it to Libsyn, which I'm going to get to next. Again, put yourself in the listener's shoes over and over again. Because as much as you think the podcast is about you, as much as I like to think Carpe Diem with Jasmine is about me, it's really not about me. It's about my ability to connect with other people and for them to be like, oh, that was interesting, that was engaging, I've been inspired, I've been motivated to take some type of action in my life. So I'm just a vehicle, but it's not about me and it won't be about you, even though it is your podcast. So, final thoughts before we get into some questions about podcasting. It's very important to be consistent. So I can't stress consistency, consistency, consistency. You need to have a plan. I recommend that newer podcasters go back and what I do the batch recording. And that's really when you record maybe your whole season at one time and then you release it. You can release it on a schedule in your feed. Or maybe do 3 episodes at a time. I know with Office Centers it's $15 an hour. So you want to make sure that, they say a podcast really should not be longer than 27 minutes just because the average commute is 27 minutes. So you want to make sure people can listen to a car. So because I'm long-winded, and I do a lot of, this is part 1, part 2. I aim for 25 minutes. That's my personal aim of 25 minutes in the podcast. I have one thing. About the feed. I'm sorry, I thought I had a slide in this to talk about the feed and the server on getting started. So when you're getting started with your podcast, these are the things that you're going to need. You'll need a graphic, which is very easy for someone to make a graphic. You register your podcast with iTunes. Even if you are an Android person, I think it's very important for you to have your podcast on iTunes because that's the leading platform. And then you need a feed service. I use Libsyn, and I know there is Blueberry.
How do you spell that?
LPSYN. Yeah. And the nice thing is they give you metrics on each episode. They give you a custom link. I think I paid $15 a month. But the really nice thing about Libsyn is that they not only do they do iTunes, but they feed it out like to Google Play, to Stitcher, to FM Player. It's amazing if I were to let me just Google, because I'm like, how did my podcast get to all these different places? I know I didn't put it there, but I'm just going to do a little Google right quick, real time. Because there's so many different podcast networks coming up every single day. It's like if you were responsible for manually pushing out your podcast, you wouldn't be able to do it. So I recommend the service coming in. And another thing to be cautious of with your feed service is the ownership of the content and how long you're supposed to have exclusivity. So I definitely recommend reading the fine print. Oh yeah, so I just Googled my podcast. So it's Apple, Stitcher, Podbean, Pod Paradise. So these are platforms I didn't even know about. Google Play. I never heard of Podbean and Podcast Paradise. So there you go. That's why I think it's important to use a professional feed service and to pay for it. And like I said, it's a minimum fee of $15 a month, but then you get metrics, and if you're trying to get sponsors, that information will be helpful.
Yeah, and maybe we would even do that if we were going to really work on a podcast for Office Centers, that we would put it together and then put sponsored by Office Centers, and people could post and maybe do it under our site.
Right.
some people that are in our community.
Well, that's what we were talking about doing, right?
Yeah, maybe we can
And
do
it
that.
could be a conversation, and
yes.
really kind of like the newsletter or the monitor spread, but
That's what we're really thinking
feed.
about is
Right.
Jasmine and I putting the podcast
Together.
together. So for Office Centers, for the members, and to kind of be a sponsored by, but really showcase the businesses in our workspace community.
Right. And one of the reasons, another great benefit to get into podcasting is that it's an opportunity to practice public speaking, or if you have a business and you have the goal of maybe doing some media and you don't have a reel, and someone's like, well, are you good on camera, or what does your voice sound like? You can say, oh, I was a guest on this podcast, or I have my own podcast, because no interviewer wants to have a conversation with someone and they're stumbling and they're trying to force feed the answers out of them. So this is a great way to get experience and practice speaking, public speaking, and then also media experience. Now, are there any questions?
Won't we talk about the fine print? We get later on.
Oh, I was just saying, read it with your feed service. Just read it, just to make sure, like, who owns the podcast, how long do you need to be there, can you? I've not had any problems with Libsyn, that's why I recommend them. But I have heard of people having issues when they wanted to move to a new podcast service or platform. They couldn't take their old episodes and things of that nature. So.
Okay.
This is really interesting because my business is media, planning and buying. And I've got a lot of different clients, but podcasts have become so hot with the clients. The problem we have on the other side is they're a dime a dozen, obviously, because there's so many. Frankly, there are too many podcasts out there to look at sometimes.
Well, no, yeah, somebody said that, but then the argument is that no, there's not too many.
Oh, no,
podcasts.
and believe me, I'm a big believer, I mean, because I use podcasts for my clients. My problem as a media professional is trying to find the appropriate podcast for whatever my client's target audience is. And, you know, it's the problem is, you know, you bring up Libsyn. When you're working with iHeart or a major aggregator, there's not enough like Comstar data to be able to sometimes show who that actual podcast is reaching.
The audience.
Yeah.
So you can ask for, so I'm a smaller podcast, I'm not like on the iHeart platform. I think you need to have 25,000, it used to be 25,000 listeners per episode. It might be 100,000 episodes. I mean, listeners per episode now, I know. But when I reach out to people about sponsoring my podcast, I give them a screenshot of my Libsyn data. So,
Okay, and that helps.
transparency, right.
Yeah.
And then another thing, and I don't know if what size audiences you're trying to reach, if you're doing smaller or medium podcasts, but I also, as a content creator, I'm listed in Cision. So a lot of
Say that again?
Cision.
What is that?
So Cision is a media database where you can find media out, all the various different media outlets, and they actually have a category for podcasts now.
How do you spell Cision, Jasmine?
It is C.
Can't remember how to spell it.
I know.
CISIO.
No, I'm going to give you the right. CISIO. Yes, you're right. Cision.
I'm a really good
You
spelling.
are. See, like I said, you're one of those people that told me about typos.
No, I didn't.
And they have blogs in Cision also.
I'm a fast reader, I
So
never
it's-
get typos.
So is Cision the name of the organization?
Yep, it's the
Or the
company.
company itself?
It's, yeah,
Okay.
and it's their database.
Okay.
Is that a free database, do you know, or is that
No,
something you have
it's
to
a
pay
for it.
subscription.
Yeah, I knew
It's
that.
a little spendy.
They track newspapers, broadcasts,
Got it.
podcasts,
Thank you.
social media. It's just what you're willing to pay.
Right.
I would think that when we put the podcast rooms.
If you're
in here-
interested, talk
yeah.
to me offline.
Yeah, sure, no,
If
that's
you're
good.
interested.
But I said, I think that when we
I'm
put in the podcast rooms here, we wanted to make sure that they had the proper, as far as putting in soundproofing, you know, microphones and all that kind of thing to make it easier for people, because I would think that you were saying as people are recording in a library or they're recording different places, that the quality of what it is you produce makes it easier for the end user to listen to, your audience to
Right.
listen to, if you've got a good room and a good mic and a
And
good
that is some of the
types
things that, I mean, that was like some
Yeah.
of the feedback when I first started. Someone was like, oh, you need to improve your quality. We're getting a little, and I'm like, really? My comforters are soundproof enough? Or even before you had the studios here, I would come here and unfortunately.
maybe like this room, yeah.
And I would
Vent.
use the tiny conference room and that would not work because of the vent. And I'm like, oh.
It's great until
Right.
the air goes on.
Right. So it is,
It's
there's
nice to
something
have
that's
rooms
the
that are
right.
specifically designed with a podcast in mind.
And Lori, I have to commend you. Thank you for doing that investment.
Oh, yeah, you know,
Since-
I said I
because
would
for you, right, Jasmine?
Yeah.
It was an investment for you, one, to recognize this possibility, but two, we've
because
been
you're
very
podcasting
impressed.
in there
Correct.
regularly.
Correct, so, and I can tell when I put the headphones on, how in-depth the soundproof space is. I used to work in manufacturing, in the industrial side, and there's only so many soundproof rooms in the country. And when I walked into my very first soundproof room for industrial, the sound stop is just as on par with what you created for the two studios in St. Louis Park and Woodbury. In other words, that's a good thing. So just to let
And
you
even
know
like
that.
the
You know, so
microphones
thank you
and
for
the
that.
pop filter,
Absolutely.
they're
Have it
strong
all.
because
Huge.
I can't
Huge
remember them,
difference.
and you know, I spent a lot of money on a microphone to do it at
Yeah.
home, but
So
still.
thank you.
Oh, thanks, because we,
Seriously,
like I said,
that-
we
yeah.
looked for people who were gonna give us great advice about that.
Yeah.
And then the room, you know, we really worked with the architect to make sure that there's batting in the top and the walls, the soundproofing panels, the bouncing,
tell.
all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is an investment in
Yes.
that. And like I said, it's not just, you know, $500-600. It was
No.
probably over $10,000
By
per
the time
room,
it was all said and done.
just to put it all together. But,
And
you know,
to
like I
do it
said,
well.
more like
And-
$15,000 to $20,000 worth of value. So when people can rent it, our
Yeah.
members for $15 an
Yeah.
hour, or if you're gonna be on a more regular podcast, we
Yep.
could even do something else for you. That makes it really nice to
Yes.
be able to do it. And when we're trying to decide if it's busy, should we putting it in more of our centers
Right.
other than Woodbury and here? We
How are
might-
you marketing that right now?
we're just marketing it to our members, and we've only had it for a couple of months. I think that it came in here May, June,
What, May?
May, and I think April was when we got it over at Woodbury.
Right.
Or no, you got it here first
Yes,
and then
yeah.
Woodbury. So, you know, it's just something that I thought, so many people are asking about podcast rooms, and I would like to podcast myself.
Right.
Jasmine and I are putting together gonna put together a series for office centers, and like I said, showcasing our businesses, because I think it's such a great media tool and a great marketing tool, that I just thought, you know, if we had a little room and there's people who are gonna see value in that. So,
Yeah.
you know, and right now we have some, try an hour for free, so if you wanna do something with that, we have that for our members and things
So
like that.
yeah, I mean, and that's a great deal because you're
a good
paying
It's a great
$15 if you're a member for an
Yeah.
hour,
$30 for now.
30 if you're not a member, and if you remember, if I go back to the site, you need to plan when you do your podcast. You don't have to have like the tightest script, but you should definitely, I always have my questions done ahead of time. I send the questions to my guests ahead of time so that they can look at them, they can come with answers, because you don't want people to be, you know, of course you want there to be some organic conversation in there, but you want people to be planned and prepared for the experience. And you think if you are doing a 25-minute podcast episode, and even if you have a few outtakes, you can do 2 episodes for $15. So if you break it down, you can record 2 podcast episodes at office centers for $15.
The other thing too is that I think these instructions have been great. They're really simple to work with. Because I didn't know anything about the audio, you know what I mean, Jazz? I was looking at numbers too, and I'm like, no, that's not gonna work for me as a startup.
Right.
But this has been really great too. And the other thing that I
That's
wanted
just
to
some
make-
information that we
The
put together.
instructions
to
that are
instructions
to
to
help
podcast
you.
their
The other thing that I want to say too is that coming into the Office Centers community has been fabulous for me. I just came in March, so I'm brand new. But what I found with the podcast rooms is that the energy is perfect. It's balanced, and I think that to me, it gives me that comfortable space to really speak to what you've been saying, Jasmine, about how do I speak to my audience. So I'm getting to the point where I forget that I'm in a podcast. I forget that I'm just having a conversation, and that really helps. I believe in spirituality and energy,
Well,
and
you
that
know,
really
I think
helps
energy is
me.
everything.
Exactly.
It's what we do here for the co-work people.
Exactly.
I mean,
Like the
and that's
energy.
the key to the
To me,
podcast.
it's the
I
key.
mean, I could break it down a little bit more and give like
Please do.
specifics, but like if you're doing a podcast, so I remember when I first launched and I'd say, oh my God, you know, thank you for listening to my listeners to
Yeah.
Carpe Diem Jasmine podcast. And it's like, it's not my
No.
listeners, it's my one listener.
Yeah.
It's Fabiana. So it's like, good morning, thank you for listening to the Carpe Diem with Jasmine podcast. I really appreciate the feedback you provided. I've got something really excited planned for you today. I'm super excited about this guest. I hope you will be as excited as I am. Not I hope y'all will be, or you know, but it's really
That's
a
really great feedback. I
one-on-one
never thought about that.
conversation. It's not the masses. I mean, you're reaching the masses, but you are talking to one person, or you're talking to 2 people. So if you're having, you know, you're on the stage, you break down the wall.
Yeah, it's really good. Never even thought about that. Sharing good stuff. Anybody got questions?
Yeah.
How do you draw people in? Like, how do you make people want to listen to your podcast that sets you apart from other ones that may be similar?
I don't know, I think, that is a good question, and, you know, with everything I do, it's like my goal, like, to get outside of my sphere, like, I want everything to get legs and get outside of my sphere, and so I think that, to Carol's point, I am a spiritual person, so I pray about it, and it's always my prayer that it'll reach the right people, but I ask people, I always say, sharing is caring, so if you like this episode, please share it with someone else, you know, I promote it on social media, I promote it on Reddit, but you really just do your best and, you know, promote it to the best of your ability and hope that it gets legs and moves on.
I think too that because we work in a community, it's really good to be able to say, these are the podcasts we like this week, and maybe we're going to do something where we actually promote podcasts, where we put some things together, where we do some podcasting, where, you know, we're experimenting with this right now because it's such
It's
a
such
big.
a new, and it's
Yeah,
new.
it's new.
And
So-
you know, I will say that podcasting, like again, this is the second version of podcasting. And I don't know, does anybody remember when podcasting first came out in the early 2000s and then it died?
Yeah.
But it is not going to die this time. And I remember when people were talking about social media and it was like the wild, wild west, the new frontier. And, you know, people, I work in media too, and I do a segment on WCCO television. And it's amazing when you see traditional media, like television and radio, playing in this new media or unforeseen territory, you know that it is valid and that it is here to stay. Because why would they be making the investment? So it is not just new media. This is
Alternative media.
yeah, alternative. Or you think about the people cutting cords. I mean, how many people, raise your hand, you have cable in here? Or direct TV?
No.
No, nobody has cable or
I
direct.
don't.
Oh, you do too. Okay.
I will.
Half of us have cable. Half of us have cable in this room. So just imagine in probably next year you ask someone, do you listen to the radio? No, I don't listen to these podcasts.
Right.
Or I only listen to Amazon Music. Or, you know, so it is here to stay.
Well, the fact that iHeart is the leading radio, arguably the leading radio
Company.
in the world. And the fact, I mean, they are the harbinger of the podcast industry right now. They're spending millions of dollars to try to promote podcasts. And, you know, their own shows, like, you know, K-Fans in the Morning Show.
Right.
I mean, my God, we buy that for one of my clients. I mean, it is by like 1/10 of the cost of buying the podcast versus running a schedule on K-Fan.
Well, okay, so you buy media. Let's go back. This is 2019. Let's go back 20 years ago when you would die for something in, you know, let's just keep it local. And I'm not picking on anything, but like St. Paul, Minneapolis Magazine. How much was that at? And now it's like, no, I'm going digital.
Yeah, everything's programmatic digital right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like it is.
So, I mean, I think we're heading in the right direction, and I want to be a learner, because I've been in business for a long time, and I'm not to come up in a digital world, so I think that a lot of us need to say, you know what, we know the direction, let's get the right tools, and that's going to help us make decisions about what we're going to do and how we're going to showcase our businesses in this format.
And what's your name?
Susan Dubs.
Susan, to Susan's point, there's this statistic that says 60% of listeners, out of 300,000 listeners, 60% of those listeners said they have purchased something that they have heard their podcast host advertising, promoting, endorsing, saying they use it. 60%.
It's got much higher endorsement
Right.
capabilities than standard.
Well, not just endorsement, but conversion
That's
to
what I
taking
mean.
action.
Yes.
Right, it's
Yes.
a conversion, right?
And is where that comes from is podcast listeners are active, engaged listeners.
Right.
Where radio listeners are passive.
That's right.
It's
Because
it's background
You turn
noise,
on your
right?
car,
Yeah.
Got it.
the radio is on,
Yep.
you passively listen.
Yep.
If you're going out on your phone, if you're going out to a iTunes or whatever and seeking out a podcast and downloading that podcast, you are interested in that topic.
Exactly.
Got it.
You are more engaged
Got
in
it.
that topic.
And it's
Or-
still so cheap.
Or you're a follower of that person.
Yeah.
And for our purposes, because even though I've had my podcast, like I said, I was on hiatus because of the political scene and whatever, personal story I'll tell you about another time. I do recommend that everybody keep their content free at this point. You know, some podcasters are like going to a subscription service, but I recommend keeping your content free. Maybe if you have a significant audience and you know you have a big audience in St. Louis Park and you want to say, hey, come and, you know, talk to Lori and say, look, I'd love to do a live event at Officers.
Yeah.
Can we cut off the air
Yeah.
from 7 to 8 so that I can do this live event, or can we bring in some stuff and then charge tickets for that? And that's another really interesting thing about podcasting. Unless you're behind a big network, and I know Hubbard is doing some work to build their podcast platform also, that most podcasts are self-funded, and you know, unless you are getting the 25,000, well, probably 100,000 listeners per episode, which is really hard in the beginning. It's good for small businesses to support each other and think of of sponsoring other podcasts if you're not ready to podcast yet, or you don't think a podcast is, ready for your fit or perfect fit. But you can sponsor a podcast and really help another small and medium business out.
And I was even thinking of a podcast group, where we would put together something for people who want to do a regular podcast, where we could get together and maybe talk about some of the
Like a
content.
meetup group, yeah.
Almost
Or
like
like a
a
brainstorming or a mastermind.
group
Yeah,
or something,
mastermind.
but yeah, I think that it would be a fun, but that could be a really fun thing to do as well, so that we could be more educated about what's good content and how to get it out there too.
Did everyone sign in? Because if you signed in, I'll send you this great article. I have like 2 nice articles that I found in preparing for this. Your wheels look like they're turning, Javier. I said your wheels look like they're turning. Do you have a question?
No, I'm just like thinking.
Yeah, that's what I said. Your wheels look like they're turning. Any other questions? I hope you found this informative. This is very much podcasting 101. Maybe we can do a podcasting 102 or
We
201 when we
I
get a little
promise
bit
we
more
will.
in depth.
I'll bribe her, we'll do that. You can talk about some things, and we have some
What's your
really-
background?
I am the media relations specialist for Three Rivers Park District.
Oh, I used to call that 3 Rivers.
And we have just launched, end of December, beginning of January, a podcast called The Wandering Naturalist Podcast.
Oh, that's really
Where we
interesting.
explore nature topics. It's basically nature geekdom, and we have one of our naturalists who is a nature educator. He works with the public, and then we have one of our wildlife biologists who's actually out in the field, and it's basically a banter cast.
Banter cast, there we go.
It's basically a banter cast about nature topics.
And then one thing too, I'll give you another tip for those starting a podcast. If you're talking to one person, and when you're speaking to that one person, you want to engage that person's senses. So you want to have them imagining, ooh, I'm there. I see that in my mind. I smell that. I feel that. Oh my God, I see that green frog. Oh yeah, and that frog, I just saw a frog in my backyard the other day. So you want to engage your listeners.
Theater of the mind.
Yeah.
Well, I think this was really informative. I learned a lot today, and I'm really excited to get going on our project.
Yeah, we've been talking about this forever.
Exactly, but things kept going on, we keep pushing it to the back. I think it's time to move it from the
We're gonna
back
move it
burner to the front burner.
Well,
It's
Lori has been
simmering
very
for a while.
busy. She opened, remodeled, built a house, had some personal things that she was dealing with.
But
So,
hopefully
yeah.
things have evened out today, right? So that's all good. I want to thank you for coming, but I'm going to tell you about just another few upcoming events. But Jasmine, thank you so much.
Thank you,
We are
Jasmine.
just at the start of this, right? So we'll go from there. But we're, expect to hear more from Jasmine, from me, as I'm learning more, because this is such a great platform for so many of our members. And our community is almost 1,500 members strong. There's people within this community who are great podcasters, who are great mentors, who are teachers, and so we've got some people who can really help out if somebody wants to do some things. Remember that on every Monday during the month of August is Buy One, Get One Monday, so if you sign up for a plan, our basic plan is $99. You can work at any of our 7 locations and have access to everything for free. We have work-free Fridays all month, so if you want to try Office Centers, come over, sign in, and you can work for free any Friday during August. we're looking at headshots. Will, who's our brand specialist, and he's a photographer. We're doing headshots this week, tomorrow at International, next week at Woodbury. 2 new headshots. Because if you're gonna podcast, you need to have some recent headshots. 2 shots for $35, and you can bill it on your Office Center account as well. On Tuesday, next Tuesday, our biggest event of the month is always our Taste of Woodbury, which is a pizza networking group over in Woodbury. It's every week, every month it's a Zoom. So that's what I was gonna tell you. And then on the 22nd, we will be hosting a power lunch, and it's going to be Magic Brad Gittman, and he's going to be speaking of the magic of experimental marketing and live events. And then we're on the 26th, it's National Dog Day. We are actually going to have a Dog Day Yappy Hour at Woodbury. If you have a decent, well-behaved animal, please bring it. They must be as good as my dog Spike. Please bring him over. Jazz, I'm not sure about your dog, but you know.
My dog.
He's
he is a better guest than he is a host. That's what I
was
tell
gonna
people.
say.
He's
And
the
as
best
long as-
guest,
and he can
not
tell
the
us
best
all
host.
his-
He's not like his mommy. His mommy loves the host. He loves to go.
All right, I was gonna say, and as long as he wears a muzzle, he's more than welcome. We've met each other's dogs, right? There's kind of like one of those things. So if you have a dog, you wanna come to Yappy Hour, that's on August 26th, which is National Dog Day. It's Woodbury, which is dog friendly. And then, Will's gonna be taking pictures of you and your dog that day if you come out. So
For
it's
free.
all good. What?
For free.
And everybody gets a free picture of yourself and your dog, not for $35, for the low, low price of $0.
Can I say something? This is totally off subject, but I saw it on Facebook today. I think you should have, because you, especially at Woodbury, there's some company and they do a paint by number of your dog, and they're gonna do it at a brewery. You should bring that to office centers where we can come and paint.
Paint our dogs?
Yeah, but you send them a picture ahead of time, and somehow they give you some number grid. I just
All
saw
right,
it today.
well, we'll get on it. Brianna, that's your job.
Okay,
So if there's
I wanna
anything
make
that
it
we
happen
can help you with
before-
during the month of August, we are co-working. It's, last Friday was co-working day at Office Centers. We don't just take a day. We meet all month to celebrate our co-working, so please come in. We loved having you today. I hope you bring something back that's gonna help you in your business, so take
Thank
good
you.
care. Thank you so much.